Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Anissa, and thank you everyone for bearing with us once again. Could we have a motion to come back into our regular meeting from our recess?
So moved.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
Second.
Thank you, Commissioner Mascarenhas. Madam Clerk, please call the vote.
Commissioner Behill?
Yes.
Commissioner Mascarenhas?
Yes.
Vice Chair Romero?
Yes.
Chair Brush?
Yes. Thank you all for your patience. We're on item 12A, which is considering a very early draft of the proposed short-term rental ordinance with our senior planner, Andy Jones. And as we were tossed out of the online world, I was asking a question about it's on page 13 under item 4.19.9, number of permits. Under item E, it refers to a cap when we were talking about the number that we were limited to, that the cap should not exceed 5% of total housing stock in Taos County. And I'm just wondering if you could share with us where that 5% number comes from. Is that somehow like best practices for a healthy community that has enough houses for normal people to live in?
So I kind of based that. So I based the original cap, the 1,000, on the fact that the estimates that we've gotten from the third-party software company, Granicus, which we just contracted with to help with compliance and monitoring once we go live with this ordinance. An estimate I got from them back in August was that there were around 950 unique listings at that time. Later, I believe it was January or February, they said around 1,200 unique listings. What we have currently permitted through the home occupation permits is probably, through the course of the 7 years that we've been doing that, we've maybe permitted close to 300 home occupation for short-term rental. And so that 1,000 is kind of is what seemed comfortable in terms of recognizing what exists, giving those people an opportunity to come into compliance, recognizing that probably not all 1,200 of those units will be able to come into compliance if there might be structures that are not adequate, recreational vehicles and the like, that might be better suited for a special use permit or some other avenue, things that may be more, once you look at it, you're like, well, that's an Airbnb that needs to, or I mean, that is an actual bed and breakfast, or that's a small inn or something like that. And so some of those operators will probably need to apply for a special use permit to continue. So that's kind of where the rationale behind the 1,000. It's a nice round number, but then the current census estimates, I believe there's 20,850 somewhere in that ballpark housing units in the county. And so 1,048 or something is 5%. And I said, well, that would give us an ability to keep this sort of same level that we're proposing now and keep it in check as we're able to create more housing stock. Then we could look at potentially raising the permit limit with that, but it would have to be tied to the housing stock. I did do some research to see if there was any best practices in terms of what a good percentage is. I couldn't find anything steadfast. I know that some communities have far more. I guess in perspective, the city of Santa Fe, which is, I think close to 90,000 people, has a 1,000 permit limit for that. So that's, roughly, well, probably 4 times as many people as what we have in the county. And so it's also, I guess, allowing us to have 1,000 is an accommodation for those who are already existing operators, even though they haven't been in compliance, the majority of them, but also kind of a nod toward our tourism economy.
Thank you. I appreciate your thoughtfulness on this. Commissioners, other questions for Mr. Jones?
Then what comes to mind when you're talking about
trying to figure out that number is also the need, and so that should be definitely something we take into consideration when we lock in a number, is what are we really lacking here in Taos and what do we, anticipate? So just
Right.
something to consider.
And I did make an effort to try and determine that. I reached out to Karina at the town of Taos, head of marketing and tourism there, and they don't necessarily have those numbers in terms of monthly visitors, or I think there's something like 2,800 hotel beds right now in town, which would probably be the majority of hotel beds because there's not any functioning, large hotels outside of town limits that I can think of. Well, there's a couple. There are a couple. There's the new one on the south side. There are a few, and so, but that's probably pretty close to what the total hotel occupancy level is. But in terms of matching that with tourism information, Mr. Madrid and I did talk to a company that tracks cell phone data in order to sort of track movement in and out of the county. It's a technology that well, frankly, creeps me out for one thing, but also just I don't know how reliable that information is in terms of tracking tourism, and so we're still trying to figure out a way to get that data. But I agree 100%. It would be really great to have
Right.
that number.
And if I could just kind of break it down a little bit more in that, I know that's important to understand tourism-wise, but I'm also thinking about like the locals and the workforce and what we're lacking, like how many positions the school can't seem to fill because there's no housing
Yes,
for them and that kind of stuff. But I guess that's something that we're going to try to figure out
it
as
is.
we go along.
Yeah, and so I aimed this ordinance more at conservation of what is available now. Obviously, there's also the question of suitability. If you prohibit someone from renting out a 4,000 square foot home, that's not going to automatically fit the needs of our local workforce. So, that's that as we go forward and we develop kind of more housing plans with the Taos Housing Partnership, and as we work on future policy here at the county, I think we want to encourage development that is more suitable for the workforce. We are seeing more and more short-term rental applications, the ones that we do get, on smaller homes. And so I of the ones I've tracked so far, I looked at the average square feet just this morning, and it was right around 1,600 square feet. So obviously, you've got some 4,000 and 5,000 square foot homes, but you've got some smaller ones. You've got some casitas. I think notably, Granicus has told us that 95% of the short-term rental operators in the county are not residents. So, and that was one of the rationales for creating this two-tiered system that I have in the ordinance, the proposed ordinance. I did copy that from Santa Fe County. They have this similar two-tiered system for owner-occupied and non-owner occupied. I think we can justify that because the rationale is that if someone is living on the property, they have more of a vested interest in mitigating nuisance, in making sure that any problems are dealt with. And so, that's where that's been applied in other jurisdictions. That's been the rationale behind that. And so, but, we're looking at, 5% of units.
And just a follow-up question to that, by owner occupied, you mean someone who is like, okay, it's my casita or another home on the property where I live, not that
Yes.
I live in a different part of the town or the county. So it's not that I'm a Taos County resident, it's I'm actually living
Right.
on that property.
It has to be, either an accessory dwelling unit, a casita, or something of that nature, or even renting out a room within the primary home.
Okay.
So it has to be your primary residence.
Manager Jaramillo and then Commissioner Vihel.
Those same lines, let's just say An individual has their parents' homes that's deceased, that lives in Ranchos, and the person was in Seco, how the same tier would apply for them? Would that same tier apply for them, being that it's still their property even though it's not adjacent?
That's not the way I have it structured right now. It really has to be the same property. And so that doesn't prohibit them from applying for a non-owner occupied permit for that property. But I think if we go down that road, then we are giving clear or favoritism to residents of the county over non-residents, and that becomes probably a slippery slope legally.
But thank you for the question. Commissioner Vehil?
Yes, just one last comment, and obviously this, we can go on and on. Housing is so complex, but, as you're talking about size of homes, it dawned on me that obviously there's a lot of data that we still need to gather to determine what the needs are, because obviously, as you mentioned, a 4,000 square foot home would not be something that a single person would be occupying. So yeah, it's very complex, but it just really just brings to the forefront that we are in need of a lot of data to determine
Absolutely.
the need and how we're going to approach this.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you. Gentlemen, commissioners, any questions? Okay. I just have two questions for you, Andy. Have you considered, and I'm not sure if this is something we could do or something that you think might be helpful, but we represent such different corners of the county, from El Prado to Penasco. Have you considered that there should be like different, I don't know, different number of permits, or should you like divide them up by kind of area? Is that worth considering, or does that way overcomplicate things?
I've considered it, and it is complicated because we don't have zoning. out of compliance. But
Got it.
from what we've seen, yeah.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Appreciate the information.
Just
Commissioner
one
Vehil.
last question. What are the next steps?
Well, the next steps would be to, now I think we want Patrick, I want you to sit down and read it and Randy too, and get feedback from legal. Granicus has, they have someone who will review it because they're very familiar with ordinances. And so they'll do that as part of their services for us. Of course, we want admin to read it. Give you guys more opportunity to sit with it and come up with any questions that you might have. So I think we're probably in a gathering feedback stage. I probably need to sit down with Rachel and Rudy as well and get feedback from them. And so once we do that, we can revise the draft and then probably come back to you for either another work study session, or if we're feeling good about it at that time, maybe we come back for public hearing and really move toward getting this enacted.
Madam Chair, I guess I have to ask, what's the timeline? What do you see this, a year from now, a half a year? What do you think?
I'd love to see it in the next few months, honestly. So I think that, if we can get it done in the next few months, because every day we're getting new applications. And so those people, we're gonna have to deal with that situation as well.
Okay,
Thank you.
great, thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank
And
you,
Madam
Commissioner
Chair, it's
Vehil.
likely it'll go to the planning commission too, so that's another.
Right. I appreciate very much your questions about specific dates to the next step. So if I might gently suggest that as you send this around for a review, you suggest a due date. Please review by end of week.
Great.
Because we know how Patrick is. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. But you mentioned our planning director's name is Rachel Romero, and that made me think of, there was one other question. Just don't have to answer it. Just, I read this and I was like, that could get interesting. If someone appeals the denial of their permit, the planning director gets to deal with that. And I'm just wondering if we anticipate that potentially being a good way to overwhelm Rachel with appeals and complaints and questions. So I know the Granicus system is going to be a tremendously helpful tool in this, but some